Do you remember walking into your grandmother's house during Christmas and seeing those beautiful glass candy dishes filled with homemade treats? Let's unwrap 25 Christmas candies from the 1970s that turned ordinary housewives into candy-making artisans every December. Panoche. Panoche, the brown sugar fudge that separated amateur candy makers from the pros. In the early 1970s, when Harvest Gold appliances dominated kitchens, housewives were mastering this temperamental New England classic. The name came from the Spanish word for raw sugar, brought north through trade routes. You'd melt 2 cups of packed brown sugar with 3/4 cup of heavy cream in a heavy-bottomed pot. The mixture had to reach exactly 238 degrees Fahrenheit, the softball stage, or it would turn grainy. Pull it off too early, and you'd have soup too late, and it became rock candy. Once it hit temperature, you'd beat in butter and vanilla until it lost its gloss. Then pour it into a buttered pan. The result was a creamy, caramel-colored fudge with maple undertones that melted on your tongue. This was the candy grandmothers made to prove they had skills, not just recipes. Divinity. Divinity earned its heavenly name for good reason. It was white, fluffy, and seemed to require divine intervention to get right. This southern candy became a 1970s Christmas staple, particularly in homes where church socials and potluck dinners ruled the holiday calendar. The challenge? Humidity. Making divinity on a rainy day was considered futile because the sugar wouldn't set properly. Grandmothers would boil corn syrup and sugar to 260 degrees, while simultaneously beating egg whites into stiff peaks. Then came the dangerous part, slowly pouring the boiling syrup into the whites while beating constantly. One wrong move and you'd have scrambled eggs or a flat mess. Done right, divinity had a crispy exterior that gave way to a marshmallow-like center, often studded with pecans or walnuts. It was pure white, glossy, and looked almost too perfect to eat. This candy taught patience and timing, and Southern grandmothers guarded their secrets about weather conditions and beating techniques like state secrets. Chocolate peppermint creams. Chocolate peppermint creams were the sophisticated candy that looked store-bought but tasted homemade. In 1970s, suburbia, these two-tone confections appeared at every holiday party, sitting pretty on doily-lined plates. Grandmothers would start by making a fondant center, powdered sugar mixed with butter, cream, and just enough peppermint extract to make your sinuses clear. They'd roll the mixture into small balls and chill them until firm. The coating process separated the dedicated from the dabbling, melting chocolate in a double boiler to exactly the right temperature so it wouldn't seize or bloom. Each fondant ball got dipped on a fork, tapped to remove excess chocolate, and placed on wax paper to set. The best grandmothers added a tiny peppermint stick on top before the chocolate hardened. These candies combined the cooling sensation of peppermint with rich, dark chocolate, creating a flavor combination that said Christmas louder than any carol. They were elegant, refined, and proved Grandma had patience and steady hands. Opera creams. Opera creams, the candy that sounded fancy enough for opening night at the Met, but came straight from Midwestern church basements. These confections became wildly popular in the 1970s, particularly in Ohio and surrounding states where they were practically a cultural requirement. The base was a simple fondant made from sugar, cream, and butter, cooked to softball stage, and beaten until it turned from clear to opaque white. But here's where opera creams got interesting. They were flavored with everything from maple to strawberry to coffee, then hand-dipped in chocolate. The texture was crucial, creamy enough to melt instantly, but firm enough to hold its shape. Grandmothers would make batches of different flavors, marking each with a distinctive swirl or nut on top, so you knew what you were getting. The chocolate coating had to be thin enough to bite through easily, but thick enough to seal in the fondant. These candies appeared in crystal dishes at every holiday gathering, and refusing one was considered almost rude. They represented hours of work and generations of passed-down technique. Seafoam. Seafoam candy looked exactly like its name. Pale green, bubbly, and almost ethereal. This was divinity's quirky cousin, made with brown sugar instead of white, giving it a subtle caramel flavor and that distinctive seafoam color. In the 1970s, when avocado green dominated kitchen decor, seafoam candy fit right into the aesthetic. The process was nearly identical to divinity, boiling brown sugar and corn syrup to hardball stage, then beating it into stiff egg whites. But seafoam had a different personality, slightly chewier, with deeper flavor notes from the molasses and the brown sugar. Grandmothers often added chopped pecans or walnuts, and sometimes a few drops of green food coloring to enhance that ocean foam appearance. The candy had a crispy shell that shattered when you bit down, revealing an airy, honeycomb-like interior. It was lighter than fudge, but more substantial than meringue. Making seafoam required the same weather awareness as divinity, dry days only, and the same timing precision that separated successful batches from sticky failures. Bourbon balls. Bourbon balls were the adults' only candy that always seemed slightly scandalous, sitting next to the angel-shaped cookies. These no-bake confections became a 1970s staple, particularly in Kentucky and Tennessee, where bourbon wasn't just a spirit. It was a heritage. Grandmothers would crush vanilla wafers into fine crumbs, mix them with powdered sugar, cocoa powder, corn syrup, and a generous pour of bourbon whiskey. The mixture came together into a stiff dough that you'd roll into 1-inch balls, then coat in more powdered sugar or finely chopped pecans. The bourbon didn't cook off, so these packed a genuine alcoholic punch that made church ladies whisper and uncles grin. They needed to age in a tin for at least 3 days, allowing the flavors to meld and mellow. The result was a rich, fudgy truffle with a boozy kick and subtle cocoa flavor. Some grandmothers made them with rum instead, and a few rebellious ones used brandy. These candies were always placed slightly away from the main candy dish, a silent acknowledgement of their grown-up nature. Coconut bonbons. Coconut bonbons were the snowball-shaped treats that transported you straight to a tropical Christmas, if such a thing existed in 1970s Ohio. These confections combined shredded coconut with sweetened condensed milk and powdered sugar, creating a mixture that held together like snow but tasted like paradise. Grandmothers would form the coconut mixture into small balls, sometimes pressing a candied cherry or pecan into the center for surprise. Then came the chocolate coating, melted chocolate chips or candy coating that hardened into a thin shell. The contrast was perfect. Crispy chocolate exterior, giving way to moist, sweet coconut that stuck pleasantly to your teeth. Some grandmothers added almond extract to the coconut mixture, while others kept it pure. These candies appeared in paper candy cups, looking professional and bakery-worthy. They were easier to make than most Christmas candies, making them perfect for involving grandchildren in the candy-making process. The coconut provided texture, the chocolate added richness, and the whole package screamed homemade with love in a way that store-bought Mounds bars never could. Pralines. Pralines brought New Orleans sophistication to 1970s Christmas candy dishes across America. These creamy, pecan-studded confections were technically French, but Louisiana made them legendary. The process required precise timing, boiling sugar, cream, butter, and sometimes a touch of vanilla until it reached exactly 236 degrees Fahrenheit. Pull it off the heat, add pecans, and beat until the mixture turned cloudy and thick. Then you had maybe 90 seconds to drop spoonfuls onto wax paper before it hardened in the pot. The best pralines had a creamy, almost fudge-like texture, with a slight graininess from the sugar crystals. The pecans added crunch and a buttery, toasted flavor that complemented the sweet base. Some grandmothers made them with white sugar for traditional cream pralines, while others used brown sugar for a deeper, molasses flavor. These candies were temperamental. Humidity, temperature, and even the type of pot affected the outcome. But when they worked, pralines were pure magic. Sweet, nutty, creamy, and utterly addictive. They represented Southern hospitality in candy form. Molasses taffy. Molasses taffy was the candy that required muscle, patience, and usually a partner. In the 1970s, taffy pulls became a Christmas tradition in many households, turning candy making into a family event. You'd boil molasses, sugar, butter, and vinegar to hardball stage, about 265 degrees. Then pour it onto a buttered marble slab, or large platter. Once cool enough to handle but still warm, the real work began. Two people would butter their hands and pull the taffy, stretching it out and folding it back on itself, over and over. With each pull, the dark brown mixture lightened, incorporating air bubbles that gave it a chewy texture. This process took 20 to 30 minutes of continuous pulling, and your arms would ache. The taffy gradually transformed from glossy and dark to opaque and golden. Once it held its shape, you'd roll it into a long rope, cut it into pieces with scissors, and wrap each piece in wax paper. The flavor was deep and complex, sweet, but with molasses' distinctive bitter edge. This was old-fashioned candy making at its finest, connecting 1970s families to generations past. Chocolate fudge. Chocolate fudge was the undisputed queen of Christmas candy, the one recipe every grandmother had mastered and perfected with her own secret touches. In the 1970s, before microwave fudge and foolproof recipes, making real fudge meant understanding sugar chemistry. You'd combine sugar, butter, evaporated milk, and chocolate in a heavy pot, stirring constantly until it reached softball stage. Exactly 234 to 237 degrees. The waiting was torture as you stirred and watched the thermometer climb. Pull it off too early, and you'd have chocolate sauce. Too late, and you'd have chocolate rocks. Once it hit temperature, you'd stop stirring completely and let it cool to 110 degrees. This patience was crucial. Then came the beating, working the mixture with a wooden spoon until it lost its gloss and started to thicken. Pour it quickly into a buttered pan, and within minutes, it would set into creamy, melt-in-your-mouth perfection. Some grandmothers added walnuts or pecans, others preferred marshmallow swirls, and a few rebels threw in peanut butter. This fudge appeared on every Christmas plate, and families would argue about whose grandmother's recipe was superior. Caramels. Caramels were the candy that proved Grandma had serious skills and wasn't afraid of hot sugar. These chewy, buttery squares required constant attention and nerves of steel. In 1970s, kitchens making caramels meant standing over a pot for 30 minutes or more, stirring continuously as sugar, corn syrup, butter, and heavy cream bubbled together. The mixture had to reach firm ball stage, around 245 degrees, without burning, which happened embarrassingly easy. One moment of distraction and you'd have bitter, scorched candy. The constant stirring prevented crystallization and ensured even cooking. Once it reached temperature, you'd pour the molten mixture into a buttered pan, let it cool completely, then cut it into squares with a buttered knife. The texture was crucial, chewy, but not tooth-pulling, soft but not sticky. The flavor was pure butter and caramelized sugar, sometimes enhanced with vanilla or a pinch of salt. Grandmothers would wrap each piece individually in wax paper, twisting the ends like little presents. These caramels tasted nothing like store-bought. They were richer, butterier, and somehow tasted like Christmas itself. Butterscotch drops. Butterscotch drops were the hard candy that grandmothers kept in their purses for emergency bribery and church services. In the 1970s, when avocado appliances met shag carpeting, These golden discs were being poured onto buttered cookie sheets in kitchens across America. The recipe was deceptively simple. Brown sugar, butter, corn syrup, and vinegar boiled to hard crack stage, 300 degrees. At this temperature, sugar became dangerous, capable of causing serious burns. Grandmothers would drop spoonfuls onto buttered pans, working quickly before the mixture hardened. Each drop cooled into a smooth, glassy disc with that distinctive butterscotch flavor, deeper and more complex than regular caramel, with molasses notes from the brown sugar. Some added a drop of butter flavoring to intensify the taste. These candies were hard enough to last through an entire church sermon, slowly dissolving into buttery sweetness. They represented an older era of candy making, before convenience and speed took over. Making them required courage to work with molten sugar and timing to catch that perfect hard crack moment when sugar transformed into glass. Toffee. Toffee, also called English toffee when grandmothers wanted to sound fancy, was the buttery, crunchy candy that tested your dental work. This 1970s favorite combined just 4 ingredients: butter, sugar, water, and almonds. But the technique made all the difference. You'd cook butter and sugar together, stirring constantly as it progressed through every stage of candy making. The mixture started pale yellow, gradually darkening to amber, then deep golden brown as it approached hard crack stage at 300 degrees. The smell was intoxicating, buttery, caramelized, with nutty undertones. You'd pour it onto a buttered pan, spread it thin, and immediately press chocolate chips on top. As they melted from the residual heat, you'd spread them smooth, then sprinkle with finely chopped almonds. Once cool, you'd break it into irregular shards. The texture was incredible, shattering crunch that stuck to your molars, rich butter flavor with chocolate smoothness, and almond crispness. This candy appeared in decorative tins, often given as gifts, because it looked expensive and professional. Making it required confidence and commitment. Once you started, you couldn't stop stirring until it was done. Nougat. Nougat was the candy that made you appreciate what went into a Three Musketeers bar. In 1970s, home kitchens, making real nougat was considered advanced candy making, requiring precision and usually a stand mixer. You'd boil corn syrup and sugar to soft crack stage, while simultaneously beating egg whites until stiff. Slowly, drizzling the hot syrup into the whites, while beating constantly created a glossy, marshmallow-like base. Then came honey, melted and beaten in, followed by butter, vanilla, and whatever you wanted to fold in, typically almonds, pistachios, or dried cherries. Some grandmothers made white nougat. Others preferred brown nougat with added honey or molasses. The mixture was poured into a pan lined with edible rice paper, that weird, tasteless sheet that kept the sticky candy manageable. Once set, you'd cut it into pieces, each still sandwiched between rice paper layers. The texture was uniquely chewy, yet light, somewhere between taffy and marshmallow. Italian grandmothers called it Torrone and made it for every holiday. French grandmothers called it Nougat de Montélimar and added lavender honey. American grandmothers just called it complicated, but worth it. Fondant. Fondant was the building block candy, the base that transformed into mints, cream centers, and countless other confections. In the 1970s, before you could buy pre-made fondant at craft stores, grandmothers made it from scratch: sugar, water, corn syrup, and cream of tartar, boiled to soft ball stage. The magic happened after cooking. You'd pour the hot syrup onto a marble slab and let it cool slightly, then work it with a spatula or scraper, folding and kneading like bread dough. The clear syrup gradually turned opaque white and creamy as you worked it. This process took arm strength and persistence, 15 to 20 minutes of continuous motion. Once it reached the right consistency, smooth, pliable, and white, you'd wrap it and let it ripen overnight. The next day, You could knead in flavoring and coloring, then form it into anything: mint patties, chocolate centers, or shaped candies. The texture was silky, smooth, melting instantly on your tongue. Fondant was versatile, keeping for weeks when wrapped properly. It was the secret weapon in Grandma's candy arsenal, the foundation for dozens of holiday treats. Peppermint bark. Peppermint bark was the candy that looked like a Christmas card come to life. Layers of dark and white chocolate, studded with candy cane pieces. This treat exploded in popularity during the 1970s, though it had existed in various forms for decades. The process seemed simple but required attention. You'd melt dark chocolate, spread it thin on a parchment-lined pan, and let it set. Then came white chocolate melted with a bit of vegetable oil to keep it smooth, poured over the dark layer. While still wet, you'd sprinkle crushed candy canes or peppermint candies on top. The real trick was getting the white chocolate to stick to the dark without sliding off. Temperature mattered. Once hardened, you'd break it into irregular shards, each piece showing distinct layers. The flavor combination was genius. Rich, dark chocolate, balanced sweet white chocolate, while peppermint added cooling freshness and crunch. Grandmothers would make this in large batches because it disappeared fast. It required no candy thermometer, no precise timing, just patience and quality chocolate. This was the candy that proved you could create something beautiful without complicated techniques. Cream mints. Cream mints were the pillow-shaped candies that appeared at every wedding, baby shower, and Christmas gathering in the 1970s. These pastel confections were technically fondant mints, made from butter, cream cheese, powdered sugar, and peppermint extract. Grandmothers would mix everything until smooth, divide the batch, and tint each portion with food coloring. Pink, green, yellow, and white were traditional. The mixture was stiff enough to form into small balls, which were then pressed into rubber molds shaped like flowers, shells, or simple circles. After a few hours in the freezer, they'd pop out perfectly formed. The texture was creamy and smooth, melting almost instantly when you bit down. The peppermint flavor was gentle, not overwhelming, just enough to freshen your breath. Some grandmothers added different extracts: wintergreen, spearmint, or even cinnamon for red ones. These mints looked professional, like something from a fancy candy shop, but required no cooking whatsoever. They were beginner-friendly but elegant, making them perfect for gift-giving. Grandmothers would arrange them on crystal dishes, and guests would pop several in their mouths throughout the evening. Coconut ice. Coconut ice was the British-inspired candy that became an American Christmas staple in the 1970s. Despite the name, it contained no ice, just shredded coconut, condensed milk, and powdered sugar formed into a firm, sweet block. The traditional version was two-toned, half white, half pink, achieved by dividing the mixture and adding food coloring to one portion. You'd press the white layer into a pan, top it with the pink layer, and refrigerate until firm. Once set, you'd cut it into small squares. The texture was unusual, firm and slightly grainy from the sugar, but melting slowly in your mouth. The coconut provided chewiness and tropical sweetness, while the condensed milk added richness. Some grandmothers added almond extract for depth, others kept it simple. This candy was extraordinarily sweet, almost toothacheingly so, and a little went a long way. It required no cooking, no thermometer, no timing precision. It was foolproof, which made it popular among newer candy makers. British grandmothers had been making coconut ice for generations, and American grandmothers adopted it enthusiastically, appreciating its simplicity and pretty presentation. Maple creams. Maple creams transported you straight to a Vermont sugar shack, even if you were sitting in a Texas living room. These candies became increasingly popular in the 1970s as pure maple syrup became more widely available. The base was fondant, powdered sugar, butter, cream, and pure maple syrup beaten until smooth and creamy. The syrup had to be real. No artificial maple flavoring could replicate that earthy, complex sweetness. You'd form the mixture into small oblongs or balls, let them firm up, then dip them in chocolate. Some grandmothers skipped the chocolate and rolled them in chopped walnuts instead. The texture was creamy and smooth, melting quickly, with an intense maple flavor that lingered. These candies were sophisticated, the kind you'd serve when you wanted to impress. They represented a connection to American heritage, maple syrup production being one of the few food traditions truly native to North America. Some families had traditions of traveling to maple farms, making these candies taste like memories of snow-covered woods and steam rising from sugar houses. They were simple but elegant, requiring quality ingredients and gentle handling. Cherry cordials. Cherry cordials were the fancy candy that seemed impossibly difficult to make at home. A whole cherry suspended in liquid, wrapped in chocolate. Yet, 1970s, grandmothers were making them, armed with patience and invertase, a mysterious enzyme that turned fondant liquid over time. You'd start with maraschino cherries, drained and dried. Each cherry got wrapped in fondant, mixed with a tiny amount of invertase, then chilled. The fondant-wrapped cherries were dipped in tempered chocolate and left to set. Here's where the magic happened. Over several days, the invertase broke down the fondant's sugar, transforming the solid coating into a sweet liquid surrounding the cherry. The first bite was always an adventure. Would the liquid squirt out, or would you manage to catch it? The combination was perfection. Rich chocolate shell, sweet liquid center, and the cherry's slight tartness. Some grandmothers used fresh cherries instead, stem and all, making them extra fancy. These candies couldn't be rushed. They needed time to develop that liquid center. They appeared in special boxes, often saved for favored guests or given as precious gifts. Marzipan fruits. Marzipan fruits were edible art, the candy-making equivalent of sculpture. In the 1970s, when crafts were experiencing a renaissance, grandmothers with artistic inclinations turned to marzipan, a mixture of finely ground almonds, powdered sugar, and egg whites or corn syrup. The paste was pliable like modeling clay, and you could shape it into incredibly realistic miniature fruits: apples, pears, strawberries, bananas, oranges. The shaping required patience and attention to detail, rolling, pinching, adding stems made from cloves, using a toothpick to add texture. Then came painting with food coloring diluted with water, adding blush to apples, yellow to bananas, red to strawberries. Some grandmothers were so skilled, their marzipan fruits looked real enough to fool people. The taste was sweet, nutty, and slightly floral from the almonds. The texture was smooth and dense, almost like eating sweetened almond paste, which was exactly what it was. European grandmothers, especially German and Italian ones, had been making marzipan for generations. These fruits weren't just candy. They were decorations, conversation pieces, and demonstrations of skill. Turkish Delight. Turkish Delight brought exotic Middle Eastern flavors to American Christmas candy dishes in the 1970s. This centuries-old confection was made from sugar, cornstarch, and water boiled into a gel, then flavored and cut into cubes. The classic version used rosewater, a floral, perfumed flavoring that divided people into lovers and haters. Other versions used lemon, orange, or pistachio. You'd cook the mixture for over an hour, stirring constantly as it thickened from liquid to gel. Once set in a pan, you'd cut it into squares and roll each in powdered sugar mixed with cornstarch to prevent sticking. The texture was unique, soft, bouncy, and slightly chewy, like a sophisticated gummy candy. The rosewater version tasted like eating flowers, which sounds strange but was oddly addictive. Some grandmothers added nuts, pistachios or hazelnuts, pressed into the candy before it set. This was the candy C.S. Lewis made famous in The Lion, the Witch, and the wardrobe. And 1970s, kids wanted to taste what Edmund had betrayed his siblings for. It was exotic, different, and definitely an acquired taste. But adventurous grandmothers added it to their Christmas repertoire. Peanut brittle. Peanut brittle was the candy that sounded like glass breaking when you snapped it in half. This American classic reached peak perfection in the 1970s, kitchens where grandmothers had decades of experience getting the texture just right. The process was straightforward, but unforgiving. Boil sugar and corn syrup to hard crack stage, 300 degrees. Add raw peanuts, butter, and baking soda. Then pour it thin on a buttered pan. The baking soda was crucial. It created tiny air bubbles that made the brittle lighter and easier to bite through. Without it, you'd have tooth-breaking peanut concrete. The mixture foamed dramatically when the baking soda hit, and you had to work fast, spreading it thin before it hardened. Once cool, you'd break it into irregular shards. The best brittle was thin enough to be crispy throughout, with peanuts suspended in golden, caramelized sugar. The flavor was intensely sweet with roasted peanut richness and a hint of butter. Some grandmothers used cashews or pecans instead, and a few rebels made it with mixed nuts. This candy appeared in tins and jars, often given as gifts because it kept for weeks and traveled well. Mashed potatoes with minced beef gravy. Before gravy came in packets, there was this, the ultimate comfort food that turned leftover ground beef into liquid gold. In the early 1970s, as beef prices skyrocketed during Nixon-era price controls, American housewives got creative. This dish emerged from necessity in Midwestern kitchens, where stretching a pound of ground beef to feed 6 people wasn't just frugal, it was survival. You'd brown a pound of ground beef with diced onions until the meat released its fat and the onions turned translucent. Then came the magic. A few tablespoons of flour stirred directly into the grease, creating a roux that would darken and smell nutty. Slowly, you'd add beef broth or bouillon water, whisking constantly as the gravy thickened into something rich and peppery. Some cooks added Worcestershire sauce for deeper flavor. This wasn't just dinner. It was economic resistance. While politicians debated wage controls, families ladled this thick, savory gravy over mountains of buttery mashed potatoes, turning humble ingredients into something that stuck to your ribs and warmed your soul. If you're enjoying these forgotten 1970s recipes, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss our journey through culinary history. Beef and rice jambalaya. Before Cajun food went mainstream, this Americanized version brought Louisiana flavor to kitchens across the country. The dish exploded in popularity after Paul Prudhomme opened K. Paul's Louisiana Kitchen in 1979. But budget-conscious home cooks had been making simplified versions throughout the decade, using ground beef instead of expensive andouille sausage. You'd start with the Holy Trinity: onions, celery, and green bell peppers, sautéed until soft in a heavy pot. Ground beef went in next, browning among the vegetables, followed by long-grain rice that toasted until it smelled nutty. Then came crushed tomatoes, beef broth, cayenne pepper, thyme, and bay leaves. Everything simmered together for 25 minutes until the rice absorbed the liquid and each grain separated perfectly, tinged red from tomatoes and glistening with beef fat. This wasn't authentic Creole cooking, but it brought exotic flavors to suburban America. Families in Ohio and Michigan suddenly had Louisiana night, even if their jambalaya would make a New Orleans grandmother shake her head. The dish represented American culinary curiosity during a decade when regional foods started crossing state lines through cookbooks and women's magazines. Midwest hot dish. In Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the Dakotas, they didn't call it casserole. They called it hot dish, and it was practically a regional religion. This particular version became the standard bearer at church potlucks, funeral luncheons, and neighborhood gatherings throughout the 1970s. Lutheran ladies perfected this recipe, each claiming their version was the authentic one. You'd brown 2 pounds of ground beef with diced onions, then mix it with cream of mushroom soup, frozen mixed vegetables straight from the bag, and cooked egg noodles. Everything went into a 9 by 13 pan, topped with crushed potato chips or French fried onions, then baked until bubbly and golden. The cream of mushroom soup, always Campbell's, provided the creamy glue that held everything together. This dish meant community. When someone died, got sick, or had a baby, a hot dish appeared on their doorstep within hours. The recipe required no fresh ingredients, meaning you could assemble it from pantry staples anytime. It represented Midwestern values: practical, unpretentious, filling, and made with love, even if that love came from a can.